The natural world is uncontrolled and dangerous, and even the garden is fraught with danger. Quote, Aunt Edna's yard, like a medieval forest, afforded little pleasure and much to fear. The charming prairie rabbits, munching comfortably in their green wire hutches, were lascivious creatures given over entirely to the dubious delights of fornication. It was impressed upon Charlotte that the rabbits were diseased, that any moment their ears would fall off, and that this malady was highly communicable. Charlotte must also not go near the chickens either, for fear they'd fly into her face and peck out her eyes, mistaking them for grubs. End quote. None of the animals around her are safe, and even Charlotte's stain, the birthmark on her face, is in the image of a dancing rabbit, one of these diseased, lascivious creatures that Charlotte must avoid at all costs. Indeed, the hair is actually described in the stain as a symbol of the devil, and it's viewed by Edna as a mark of the sin of licentiousness, a sin that was committed by Charlotte's mother, which has now been branded upon the child. The stain, the birthmark of the hair, also becomes a social stigma which initially prevents Charlotte from attending school, and which Charlotte interprets as, quote, a mark that God himself had laid upon her to set her apart from the cruel, snot-nosed creatures who went to school. You gotta love that line. That's really funny. Well, Edna is absolutely furious at the stain's existence, trying everything she can think of to actually get it off her face. I believe she actually uses sandpaper at one point to try and rub it off. It's Charlotte's interpretation of its meaning that actually comes the closest to Freud's concept of religion, making amends for the suffering and privations that the communal life of culture has imposed upon man. Rather, Charlotte's religious interpretation actually justifies her exclusion and rejection of communal society, rather than making up for being a part of it. While Edna impresses upon the fear of the natural world upon Charlotte, Mother Superior impresses upon Charlotte fear of the afterlife, by telling her that she will be excluded forever from God's divine grace, and therefore cast into hell if Charlotte is not worthy of becoming a martyr. The acceptance of death is not merely a means to an end of becoming a martyr, rather it's actually portrayed as the ultimate state of perfection. In other words, Charlotte must be perfect in order to become a martyr, which causes the child to come to the conclusion that, quote, to be as perfect as an egg, perfect people must be dead, end quote. Rather than using religion to accept the inevitability of death, again it's per Freud's suggestion, Mother Superior uses it to glorify and celebrate the possibility of a horrifically painful death to match Christ's sufferings. In the end, there's absolutely no element of the world which does not contain some element of fear. One really can't win for losing, so it's hardly surprising that when Charlotte writes her letter to the prioress of the Covenant of the Thorny Agony, in order to ask to become a nun, that she begins her letter, quote, Dear Mother, marked by evil since birth, I have lived in horror of life and dream only of salvation, end quote. It's only towards the end of the novel that Charlotte realized that, quote, she had always been afraid, that it was above all fear, not faith, that was driving her on, end quote. The physical world of flesh and death, however one might try to repress it, will not be denied, and the result of the religious rejection of that fleshy world climaxes in Charlotte's terrifying vision of God's pyramid temple, quote, constructed from pieces of red meat, sewn together with thick black thread, and the whole thing stank of rotten chicken offal, end quote. It is this nightmare edifice that is actually the true house of God, in a world of flesh, death, and decay that cannot be denied. While the God of nature presents his dark face here as a counter-reaction to the attempts to repress him, both Charlotte and the reader by this point in the novel have actually already seen his kinder side. The God of nature first appears when Charlotte uses Emile's seed catalogs and the Bible as reading books since she can't go to school. Charlotte chooses to pray, quote, to the Lord God, the God of the tulip and the tomato, the God of the strawberry and the scarlet gem, end quote. Charlotte also uses nature to illustrate lessons from the Bible since she has no toys, by using pastel crayons to draw faces on the smooth pebbles of the garden path. These pebble people become biblical figures in Charlotte's games. God the Father is one of Emile's pails, who nevertheless punishes the wicked with as much severity as the Old Testament God, as shown when God the Father punishes the pebble Joseph by, quote, dropping Joseph down the well, a punishment so severe that Charlotte was riddled with guilt for days, end quote. Charlotte moves this severe God the pail into the back shed and, quote, covers him with rags so that he could no longer be witness to what she was doing. Yet even when Blinded and banished to a sunless corner, he continued to exert a weird influence. Whenever she thought of him, a monstrous wing would blot out the sky, end quote. The influence of the Old Testament God is weird to Charlotte's Pebble people, and he's a monstrous figure whose capricious wrath is something to be feared and avoided at all costs. Rather than alleviating the fears of Charlotte and her natural Pebble people, this Old Testament God simply adds to them, just as the figure of God as taught by Mother Superior and Edna adds to Charlotte's horror of life and the world around her. Charlotte's attempt to reconcile these two images of God clearly demonstrates that one is incompatible with the other. The God of the Old Testament is a monster who blots out the sky, while the God of the tulip and the tomato quietly answers Charlotte's prayers and provides all the garden plants need to survive and thrive. The decaying pyramid of meat is, while an integral part of this God of nature, it's but one side of a much larger message. Every religion needs a holy spokesperson from whom the parishioner can receive the divine word, and the same is true for the God of nature, whose human spokesman on earth is Archangel Popane. Unlike Edna and Mother Superior, Popane not only accepts the natural world as it is, he revels in it, by choosing to live in the woods rather than in the town. Popane stands in direct contrast to Edna and Mother Superior in that, unlike either of them, he tells Charlotte, quote, all he knew, and was there anything he did not know, about life, love, the seasons, and dogs, end quote. It is Popane who actually tells Charlotte that her menstrual bleeding is not a kind of stigmata as she believes, but means that she can have babies. This is in fact the only instance where the Catholic Church actually fulfills one of Freud's principles, namely the retardation of sexual development. Despite her rigorous education at St. John's, and despite being surrounded by women all the time, no one has bothered to tell any of the girls anything about their approaching puberty. Therefore, when Charlotte actually begins her first menstruation cycle, she's at first horrified, and then decides it must be some kind of stigmata. It's only the sensible Popane who realizes that such information is, quote, damn important, unquote, and is actually willing to explain the reality of the situation to Charlotte. Even more specifically, he answers Charlotte's questions about her late parents, while her Aunt Edna, quote, won't tell her anything, end quote, about either of them, and neither will anyone else in the town. Unlike the townsfolk, Popane is also unafraid of the gold-colored she-wolf that has been seen around town. He tells Charlotte, quote, wolves aren't like men, it's just famine that makes them cruel, and that's the truth. The roots of all things whisper together in the earth. The wolves know far more about the world, oh, they know things, than most people living among the roots as they do, end quote. While the townsfolk, including Edna, see the wolf as a sign of evil, Popane understands its ways and is unafraid of the animal. Even after the wolf attacks him, kills his dog, and actually rips off one of Popane's ears, he wisely harbors the animal no ill will, saying the loss doesn't matter because he can, quote, still hear the deer singing, end quote. After all, it's only men who are cruel without reason, while the wolf only becomes cruel when it's starving. Popane knows all the names of the wildflowers in the woods, the roadsides, and the meadows, and which plants in the forest can help heal Charlotte's broken arm. Everything in these woods is a medicine or a mystery, he tells her. The mysteries of the woods don't frighten Popane, who recognizes the gold hair and the sulfur-colored she-wolf for what they are, images of the God of nature. They act as his messengers, his agents for change. It's the gold-colored hair that Charlotte's father kills while his wife is in labor, and it's this hair who stamps its image upon Charlotte's face. Oh, sorry. It's the sulfur-colored wolf who humbles Popane by ripping off his ear, thereby causing him to give up liquor. And it's the gold hair who causes Charlotte to leap from the train and escape into the woods. And it's the hide of a yellow wolf that the exorcist uses to disguise himself, thereby attempting to masquerade as a messenger of the God of nature. Unlike the gilded gold of the church, the gold color of the hare and the wolf are natural gifts, given to them by the God of nature, and that marks him as his messengers, but only to someone like Popane who has the eyes to see what they really are. It is Popane's practical lesson that ultimately saves Charlotte and the townsfolk from the exorcist's murderous rampage. Charlotte tells Popane, quote, you gave me the eyes, Archangel, to see how mad he was, always, end quote. It's the God of the tulip and the tomato who gives Charlotte the eyes to see what the exorcist is and the knowledge to survive without fear within the wilderness. Indeed, it is the God of the natural world, as voiced by Popane, that allows Charlotte to at last become her own person, a creature free of fear and the physical suffering demanded by the Catholic Church. It's only in the woods, away from the the church, is Charlotte able to find spiritual salvation? While Destain and Freud completely reject the idea that there's a God of any sort, clearly Ducornet doesn't agree with them. While her depiction of organized religion and Catholic dogma in The Stain shows a decaying institution more concerned with appearance and inspiring fear within the populace than worrying about actual salvation, the idea of a divine being is not totally absent. Only he's to be found in the natural world rather than within the walls of the church. The God of nature is the one who loves the physical world, who speaks to his followers through subtle signs and the wisdom of the body, a deeply personal God who is more powerful and wise than the Old Testament creation. For a writer who chooses to follow in the footsteps of devout atheists like Destain, it's an unusually spiritual message and one that's not expected within the context of a novel like The Stain. Again, Ducornet flouts our expectations and presuppositions about her work, which is, of course, what makes her such an interesting and powerful novelist. Thank you.